The Community Strategic Plan is the community's vision for the Central Coast for the next 10 years. It's called One Central Coast because this is the first plan for the whole of the Central Coast. We are one region, one council and one community. We live in a special place here on the coast, one in which we want all members of our community to feel valued and have access to a range of opportunities to participate in the richness of community life. And every one of us can play a part in bringing this community vision to life.
If people feel part of a community in some way, they'll give without probably even knowing they're doing it.
I wanted to restore this building and get it back to what it was. It was the jewel of the crown and I wanted to get it back to that.
Hello, I'm David Farmer. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Central Coast Council. And then I ask that all members of the gallery be respectful to all who are here, to allow all who are attending to listen to proceedings. And additionally, this meeting requires council staff to attend to perform various work activities. Council staff, like all other workers, are entitled to a physically and psychologically safe workspace. If I consider that the safety of staff is threatened during the meeting, then pursuant to Section 17 of the Work Health and Safety Act, we are duty bound to adjourn the meeting. Our aim is to ensure all participants are safe and able to hear, and we will take action if necessary to maintain that for our staff and the community. Such action may include expulsion from the meeting and restriction on future attendance. We appreciate your attendance and engagement in council activities.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work and play. We pay our respect to elders, past, present and emerging, and recognise their continued connection to those lands and waterways. And we acknowledge our shared responsibility to care for, protect our place and our people. Welcome to those community members that have joined us via the webcast and also those in the public gallery for the 28th of February 2023 Central Coast Council Public Forum. I will now declare the public forum open, but in doing so I just would like to acknowledge that there were quite a number of people who wished to speak, but because we had a full house they were unable to speak. But I have received one written set of words, if you like, so from Elizabeth Lovell, who unfortunately couldn't get to speak, but if she's listening, then I would ask her to contact I would say that I will have staff contact her just to answer some of her questions around what happens on Snapper Road at Ettalong Beach. So the purpose of this forum today is to hear from community members who have registered to speak on items before the council meeting tonight. And again, to repeat the words of the Chief Executive, I would ask that community members be listened to in silence and with respect. Also want to remind speakers and indeed everyone here that the webcast, that the forum is being webcast, and this means that your image and what you say will be broadcast live to the public and is also recorded. So clearly, make sure that you avoid making statements that may defame or offend anybody. Make sure your mobile phones are off because they do interfere with the technology here. And we'll move into things. So first of all, I ask the staff if they've got any conflicts of interest to disclose in matters being discussed. I don't believe that's the case, so we can move forward. Now, to our community members who are speaking, I am going to be extremely strict on the 3-minute rule. I think we will be running up there, you'll be able to see a countdown, I think when it gets to 2 minutes, is it? I believe there's a countdown there. And once your presentation is concluded, please remain at please return to your seats. So I'll go through the speakers basically in order of which the papers are appearing. So the first speaker tonight is Kate Mason on item 2.5, which is around the council decision on the administration of the 2024 ordinary election referendum on council. Kate, welcome.
So in particular, thank you for the opportunity to address council, and in particular I'm going to speak to the constitutional referendum regarding the reduction of councillors from 15 to 9 that's being proposed at a cost of $230,371. Prior to the sacking of the Central Coast councillors in 2020, there were 15 councillors. The Central Coast councillor selection was divided evenly with 3 councillors representing each of the 5 wards. The plan to have a referendum to limit councillors to 9 infers that wards will no longer be adhered to, and the Central Coast community will be melded into one, in which case it will be another layer of amalgamation on top of an already fractured amalgamation process. The New South Wales Government Councillors Handbook states, councillors play a vital role in meeting the needs of local communities. They serve their communities by listening to people in the local area and then representing these views on council. The Central Coast was already at a disadvantage with the number of councillors prior to the dissolution in 2020. In 2017, in the Central Coast, 1 councillor represented close to 17,000 people, compared to Newcastle, where 1 councillor represented 9,000 people, and North Sydney, where 1 councillor represented 4,700 people. Add to this the massive influx of people forecast to live in the Central Coast. It's an odd move to hold a referendum to decrease further local government representation. Instead, it makes sense to increase the number of councillors. Central Coast community is already feeling the strain of government decisions being placed outside of their reach and understanding. In the Central Coast in 2022-23 alone, we have a newly formed, unelected level of governance called the Greater Cities Commission, rolling out plans under the title of Vision Shapers. The Central Coast Hunter has been declared a renewable energy zone. BlackRock was awarded the rights to build the Southern Hemisphere's largest battery in Lake Monmara, an incredibly powerful global company. The draft plan of management for Central Coast Council community land has serious implications for 400 sites. We have state government transport transformations as well. People are not being told the full picture regarding local, state, greater commissions and federal plans, which are transforming the way we live, work and play, to use the phrasing in the plans. The plans endlessly speak of the importance of community having a say, yet often community members' submissions and questions are ignored. The Central Coast is at times called a global city and other times a smart city, yet this is not explained in a transparent manner to the public. All plans which we are seeing in the Central Coast are also being rolled out globally, so there is a larger agenda at play, and again, this is not made public. Whilst these transformative plans are unrolling, we have no one to represent our concerns. By the time the 2024 local council elections occur, these plans will be fully embedded, all whilst the council is under administration. And one could question if this is democratic. I'm saying no to any potential for less representation at local government for the 2024 elections and to over $200,000 being spent on a referendum process, which may potentially lead to the weakening of our community's ability to have access to the little potential representation we have left. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, our next speaker is Mr. Kevin Brooks on item 2.6, which is the Quarter 2 review. Welcome, Mr. Brooks.
The last comprehensive report on development application performance was way back in July, and it included some shocking results. DAs outstanding over 12 months had doubled in just 6 months, and the mean determination time had blown out to 85 days. In response, the administrator announced he had already hired an extra 6 permanent and 5 contract staff and was in the process of recruiting 8 new roles. He said that the next DA performance report, he said, and I quote, "I'm certainly hopeful we will see a big improvement. And if we don't, I will ask the reason why." That report was due in January but never arrived. Council now says such reports will no longer be reported to council meetings because there is no legal obligation to do so. Perhaps the operational plan before us today reveals why. Buried away in the 100-page attachment, we see that mean assessment time for DAs has blown out further to 122 days. That is a 44% deterioration in performance since the big improvement was promised. In fact, the assessment time has doubled since the fourth quarter of 2021, when Mr. Farmer commenced as CEO and Mr. Hart became administrator. They are now accountable for these results. Rather than being abolished, the comprehensive DA performance report should have been made more frequent, because what gets measured gets managed. Improving bad results is more important than trying to hide them. And if this report was abolished to cover up bad results, public servants should be ashamed of themselves. History shows that a suspension of democracy is often followed by an erosion of transparency, accountability, and eventually integrity. Tonight's report shows that Council is now committing a further 1 million in extra resources to development applications. But does throwing yet more ratepayers' money at the problem address the underlying causes? Have performance or productivity issues been considered? If this was just about employee numbers, there would have been 3 times as many people working on DAs 5 years ago, when performance was 3 times better than it is today. We need to see how employee numbers have changed over time so we can track productivity. We need transparency around the impact of the 2020 restructure, which appeared to cut staff evenly across the board rather than allocating resources in accordance with strategic and community priorities. Were any of those working on DAs made redundant during this restructure? And if so, are we now hiring people to do the same work after forking out on redundancies? Above all, we need a more comprehensive reporting on this issue, a proper explanation from those who are accountable, and an informed public debate on the causes and solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Our third speaker tonight is Matthew Wales, speaking on item 2.12, which is the outcome of the exhibition of the planning proposal related to 4346, the Esplanade at Ettalong.
Thank you, Mr. Hart, for the opportunity to address Council this evening. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the proponents in support of the recommendation on the business paper. Firstly, I'd like to thank the senior planning staff who had carriage of this proposal and their professional attention to the development and its associated issues. Whilst not an overly complex proposal, there were a number of important aspects to this matter, including the preparation of an accompanying development control plan and voluntary planning agreement, both of which are annexed to the Council's business paper. Both these accompanying documents ensure that future development is compatible and complementary to the Ettalong Beach Town Centre. It is important to note that the proposal is rather modest in nature and simply seeks to reflect the existing 5-storey height limit and floor space ratio that forms the basis for the balance of the B2 local centre zone in Ettalong Beach. The proposed DCP will ensure that future development will have appropriate facade articulation, building setbacks and generous public spaces that will greatly enhance the esplanade and interface with the Ettalong Beach foreshore and the adjoining developments. It is also important to note that the additional building height from 11.5 metres to 17 metres, an increase in FSR from 1:1 to 1.75 to 1, is predicated on each of the affected properties being consolidated. Individual properties cannot benefit from the new controls unless consolidation occurs. This will ensure that a fully integrated development will occur that seeks to transform these underutilised parcels of land and reactivate the surrounding precinct. As detailed in the business paper, this proposal builds on the recommendations and outcomes of the original Peninsula Urban Direction Strategy and is an integral part of the continuing revitalisation of the Ettalong Beach Town Centre. This is a process that has occurred over many years, stemming from the original Peninsula Main Street program in the mid-1990s, which instigated the gradual upgrading of the town centre. This was followed by the 1998 financial strategy, which saw the upgrading of the footpaths, street furniture and landscaping. This has led to more recent development applications for a number of mixed-use developments and property redevelopments that have brought substantial investment and jobs to the local centre. This has not occurred by accident. It has happened through a collaborative approach from the business community, property owners and the council. Underpinning this proposal is the desire to properly utilise valuable commercial land in an orderly manner, improve the standard of development through carefully considered controls. It is also about lifestyle and enabling people to live in the centre of town so that they use a lift to go dining and shopping rather than use their car. We've worked very closely with Council's senior strategic staff to achieve a well-constructed, high-quality outcome that will greatly benefit the town centre. We support and recommend the report to Council, such that it can now proceed to the Department of Planning. Thank you, Mr Hart.
Thank you, Matthew. And our next speaker on the same item is Peter Gillis.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. My name is Peter Gillis. I'm the spokesperson for the Ettalong Residents Group RED. The residents request that the council reject the proposal and to increase the zone height and FSO of the block at 43 to 46 the Esplanade on the Ettalong Beach. It's a block of 3,200 square metres with 77 metres of direct water frontage and only 19 metres from the heavily eroded beach. The rezoning is to accommodate a 5-storey block with 40 units over a, quote, predominantly commercial ground floor. This was proposed to the council by a developer in 2019. Council briefed the developer's plans to the LPP in a meeting on the 10th of June 21, and that meeting excluded the public, but included the planning director and 6 other council staff. The LPP may have been unaware of the plans prior to the meeting, and only 3 of the panel voted, since 1 declared substantial interest in this. The LPP approved the proposal with qualifications, notably overshadowing, view sharing, separation and setbacks. The proposal was then discussed at a 29 June council meeting, and despite vociferous residents' objections, the administrator sent a gateway proposal to the DPIE along with an 83-page planning proposal. Meanwhile, the residents signed a petition to the planning minister, talked to our local member and secretary for Central Coast. The petition was submitted to State Planning Minister Rob Stokes in October 21 and was signed by nearly 2,000 residents. To no avail, the DPIE approved the rezoning in December 21, and then Council exhibited the rezoning proposal last October. Now, 95 residents submitted objections to that, and that's an unprecedented number, 95. The Planning Department has disregarded these objections, and they appear to have ignored the LPP's recommendations for view sharing, limiting of shadowing, and not considered environmental effects. And the Council proposal has increased from 38 to 40 units since being approved by the DPIE. But this is a waterfront high-rise in a village beset with overdevelopment. 161 units within 1 block of this proposal over the next year, 52 of them on the Centrelink site, already considered a disaster by the residents. More high-rises proposed, and no one has considered the cumulative effect of this, except the residents. Environmental effects, including blocking the underlying water table, the 5 storeys increasing local heat island problems, and that this block is a mere 19 metres from the eroding beach. The bulk and scale of a 40-unit block on a 3,200 square metres of waterfront is a massive impact in a small village area, and it's not acceptable to the community. We urge you, Administrator, to reject this rezoning proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Gillis. And now we have Mark Ellis on the same subject.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. I'm actually going to talk about the same thing, but on the risk management options of this, because the response in relation to the coastal erosion risk reported in the report are ill-informed and do not adhere to requirements for the long-term risk of inundation expressed in the New South Wales Resilience and Hazards SEP from 2021. This aims to build long-term resilience to natural hazards in our community. Reports by Core Risk put this Ettalong in 276 million of development Ettalong at risk, and you are adding more, thus creating more development that will become stranded assets in the future. Ettalong Beach is also listed in the top 3 for coastal retreat straits by Core Risk, and yet this report states there is no subject to immediate coastal hazard as per Brisbane Water CZMP. Well, that plan was formulated in 2012, 10 years now after multiple IPC reports with the increasing climate crisis. Council still seems to have no understanding of the integration of hazard risk as outlined in the hazard SEP. Instead of reducing exposure and vulnerability, you are adding to it. There is no strategic merit by increasing exposure for short-term activation. Planning for Resilience New South Wales outlines 8 principles for strategic land use planning. These include protecting vulnerable assets, including all hazard approaches, and increasing and rebuilding for the changing climate. Also, in the recent regional plan strategy from 2041, it discusses the objectives for resilience and climate change, and especially strategy 7.6 and 7.8. How does this development align with that regional plan? Also, the New South Wales Government's Natural Hazard Management and Risk Mitigation Policy Framework. So, Deloitte Access Economics forecasted the increasing cost of natural disasters are to go up by 2050. Will this development become one of those disaster statistics to bear on your head? So with the cost of disaster continuing to grow, you know it, because you've mentioned it before, Mr. Administrator, so why would you continue to perpetuate this risk? I'll now move to the point on the Peninsula Urban Director Strategy. It's true there was community consultation and the result was and one of the impacts of them was traffic congestion with more development. Nothing has been done to alleviate that problem over the 10 years since that report, yet more and more community development has added to the problem. This is seen in relation to the infrastructure comments that the staff have dismissed the issues of traffic congestion and state the traffic and parking will have no inverse impact on the performance of local roads. Well, I'm sorry, 52 extra vehicles with no movements in and out of the development will affect the current road flows. Also, what happens to the overflow of parking from the visitors to the development and owners who have more than one vehicle? Parking is already at a premium at the Airlong, especially during busy times. You, as the community representative on this council, as we have no elected representatives, it is your duty to listen to the 95 official objectives and countless others in the community that object to this development and the additional height and position, and not just follow the line provided by the council officers. Please consider all these points in your role as the community advocate and reject this report.
Mr. Ellis, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. And now we move on to our next speaker, which is Mr. Harris, speaking on item 2.13, which is the Gosford Waterfront utilisation of internal restrictions.
Firstly, thank you, Mr. Hart, for your reply to my 5 submissions on this matter. I refer to agenda item 2.13, which I recommend should be deferred and returned to the staff to be prepared for another report that is accurate and not biased. There are so many errors in this report, it's an embarrassment to you and your staff. I refer to the survey that states that there is a 93% favourable rating. This is based on an acclaimed independent market research survey, which I thoroughly dispute. What has been stated by the officers is, and I'll read what it says from the agenda, the independent market research confirms the positive sentiment around the project. You listen to this, with both supportive and neutral, achieving a combined 93% favourable rating. How you can get supportive and neutral in the same category, I'm bloody if I know. Unless there's a different interpretation for neutral in the survey industry. Because I just can't work out how neutral can be linked to supportive, and if it can also be linked to the case against this waterfront, which is not listed in this report. And moving further on down the page, it says, a series of technical studies are required to progress the business case, which you've advised me in your correspondence. So therefore, and then you've listed a number of studies, which in my opinion and my knowledge, is only a short list of the studies required. For example, are you going to study the practicality of the Marine Rescue Unit at Point Clare, which has a siltation problem which referred to Gosford Council in 2013, which has not been resolved. So there's a lot more studies which are sort of needed to be done, and especially the one on Fagans Bay and the siltation in Fagans Bay, which has an impact in Bunnings at West Gosford. So the point is, since 1988, there's been many unsuccessful ventures. The only successful venture so far has been a mock-up pie shop in a car park on the waterfront That's the only successful venture since 1988. And the other thing is here, it's about climate change. The council has adopted, or has accepted that the climate change figures are adopted in 2015 in March 2015 by Gosford Council, are now underrated. The council has acknowledged and accepted that these figures need to change, but the council has yet to adopt those figures. So whatever information has been given to this research, into this research, I dispute as being accurate and misleading for the purpose of a favourable response by the public to favour the council. It's as simple as that. And there's more in the report that says about the finances. Should council receive funding from the New South Wales government? Well, the whole thing is, if this was such a good policy, you wouldn't need to get funding. You'd get funding of your own to support this proposal.
Thank you for that. And we welcome back Mr. Ellis again on item 2.15, which is the rationalisation of the long-term ownership and management of the car parking in Woy Woy.
Such a pleasure to be speaking to you again, Mr. Hart, and your lovely staff members. Yes, I'm speaking on this report. It starts out that it deprives council of the opportunity to transfer responsibility of the commuter car park at Woy Woy. Why is this item not just titled Sale of Car Park to Deepwater Plaza? Why use the words transfer and rationalisation rather than sale? Well, it's because the council know the community values its public car parks, as was displayed when the council tried to sell the Bullion Street car park. These assets are integral to the communities they serve. They are not just dollar signs to prop up the council's financial position or make staff look good. Millions have been put into these car parks for an asset for the community. In fact, in 2010, the Labor government then spent $19.8 million to provide an extra 300 spaces in the elevators to assist the community. I find it arrogant and abhorrent that such a proposal has been put forward to you to approve of our community consultation. I have not spoke to or heard one person supporting this sale ever since it was made public 4 days ago. So how does this flow with the One Coast community strategic objective of building strong relationships and delivering a great customer experience? Staff should adhere to these principles, not just use them as buzzwords. Consultation, we are told, took place with Raptus, this prospective purchaser, and Transport for New South Wales. When was the main user of this infrastructure, the community, going to be told and consulted about this unsolicited offer? Transport for New South Wales want to retain the deed, and you, the administrator, the sole representative of the community, need to reject this minute and take the position of not take the position of the staff to extinguish the option. At least show some sign of caring and concern and put this out for public consultation. The staff tried to allay fears that the commuter access would be retained, but as a privately owned car park with new owners, charges to this car park would surely follow. Also, what timeframe and covenants will be placed on keeping the 700 free car parking spaces? If such a fee was created and the cars weren't parking there, this would create increasing stress around the already oversubscribed commuters on the car park of the Woy Woy Peninsula. Also, what happens if the purchaser, several years down the track, wants to exercise their development rights and demolish the car park, extend the shopping centre and build units? This is going to be a massive waste of effort. Is this going to be another example of council underselling community assets only to have the purchaser make an economic windfall, as happened with previous council decisions? You have said the financial crisis is over, Mr. Administrator, so just selling this because it's a good idea and just come up is no excuse. Myself and many more people call on you, the community representative in this council under the administration, to reject this money-driven plan and retain the deed of agreement in the public community car park as it has been since inception since 1982. There's been no evaluation, no consultation, and absolute disregard for the community. And I don't know how this report can actually make it onto the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Now we'll move on to the last speaker, which is, again, Mr. Kevin Brooks on item 2.17, which is the Administrator's Expenses and Facilities Report.
Looking at the updated table, if we deduct the administrator's salary, which isn't an expense and shouldn't be included, then expenses claimed in the last 6 months are 45% higher than those claimed in the previous 6 months. The key item is accommodation, where a rental property for the administrator appears to be costing ratepayers $28,000 in the past 6 months, an annualised cost of $56,000. The administrator still needs to explain to ratepayers how he justifies $56,000 a year staying overnight on the Central Coast when ratepayers must pay commuting costs when working in Sydney. If overnight accommodation is to facilitate community engagement, as some have suggested, why did the administrator only attend one of the 5 early evening consultation meetings recently held on land recategorisation? I also note in the report there have been some changes since the last one to correct some basic bookkeeping errors. For example, according to reports and receipts in the public domain, in November 2021, the administrator and CEO sat down together at lunchtime to chew the cud over a pork and ham salad. Despite earning about $850,000 between them, these 2 men charged the ratepayer $17 for this pork and ham salad. This was described as a working lunch. So perhaps they were discussing their plan to deliver big improvements in DA turnaround times. The interesting point, though, is that council says this pork and ham salad was wrongly booked to the administrator's expenses when the CEO should have gone Dutch with him. This raises an interesting question. Why aren't executive expenses, including so-called office budgets, also made public? We only know the administrator's expenses because he is covered by the councillor's expenses policy and therefore obliged to disclose them. So in the interest of transparency, I ask council to also disclose executive expenses. We shouldn't have to wait until September 2024 before we open the books on what has been happening during 4 years of taxation without representation. I have one final point to make, will be brief. I believe there are still questions to be answered here about compliance with policy. I do not tend to go into details of due process to be followed. I am concerned, however, this due process appears to have become obstructive. I have 12 questions outstanding that Council's Head of Governance promised to answer by 14th of February. This promise has not been honoured. I therefore ask the Director Corporate Services to provide an assurance tonight and a timescale for answering all outstanding questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. And that does conclude our public forum for tonight. So I will now declare that public forum closed, and you are invited to come back and we'll either watch the webcast of the council meeting, which will commence at 6:30. Thank you.
Hello, my name's David Farmer. I'm the Chief Executive of Central Coast Council. Thank you for being here tonight. The role of public in the council meetings is to observe the business of council. For those wishing to air their views and make representations, we have a number of mechanisms, including the public forum, which we just held, and many of you witnessed. Letters or emails to the administrator or myself, and information on our website and social media channels. I ask that all members of the gallery be respectful to all who are here, to allow all who are attending to listen to the proceedings. Additionally, this meeting requires council staff to attend to perform work activities. Council staff, like other workers, are entitled to a physically and psychologically safe workplace. If I consider that the safety of staff is threatened during the meeting, then pursuant to Section 17 of the Work Health and Safety Act, we are duty-bound to adjourn the meeting. Our aim is to ensure all participants are safe and able to hear, and we will take action if necessary to maintain that for our staff and all the members of the community. Such action may include expulsion from the meeting and restriction from future attendance. We appreciate your attendance and engagement in council activities.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. And once again, we'll acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we live, work and play. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their continued connection to these lands and waterways. We also acknowledge our shared responsibility to care for and protect our place and people. And in declaring the meeting open, I would remind those present that whilst this is a public meeting, it is a meeting for the purpose of council decision making, and I do ask those members of the public to not interject in that process. Thank you. Let's move on. Webcasting, reminder that it is being webcast, so anything that you're saying, even up in the gallery, can be heard, and you need to be mindful because as it's recorded, then of course anything that is defamatory or might offend council cannot be responsible for your actions. So a very warm welcome to everyone in the gallery and those watching at home tonight. We have the Aboriginal Advisory Committee expressions of interest. Those are open at the moment. We're asking members of our local Aboriginal community to send in expressions of interest from now until Thursday the 9th of March. And many may recall in December, Council finalised the Central Coast First Nations Accord, which is an agreement between Council and the region's First Nations leaders. The establishment of this Aboriginal Advisory Committee alongside the Accord aims to improve outcomes for First Nations people of the Central Coast while working together for a positive future for all. Now, we are seeking a broad stakeholder representation for this committee with a mix of representatives from traditional ownership interests, community services focused on improving the quality of life of the First Nations community, and community members identifying as Aboriginal. Submissions can be made through the Council's website, and I encourage all interested First Nations people of the Central Coast to apply. Into community engagement, as I shared at our last Council meeting in January, I have been expanding my opportunities for engagement with Central Coast residents and visitors, which is something I will continue throughout the year. Last month, I attended the Australian Day community event in Leagues Club Park at Gosford and thoroughly enjoyed the many conversations over 3 hours that the CEO and myself were there. And I have to say there was an awful lot of interest in the Gosford Waterfront precinct. I'm looking forward to attending more council events this year, including the Harvest Festival, Central Coast Music Festival and the Lakes Festival. So keep an eye on the Council's website and the social media for more information on those events. And whilst meeting with community people and while I'm talking with them, I'm often asked, how can I get involved? Which is a great question, and there are many ways. But perhaps the most important is actually engaging in what's currently out on exhibition. When projects, initiatives and programs are on public exhibition, this is the joint decision process making between Council and the community. While not every decision made by Council is open for consultation, the community engagement process allows significant projects, programs, initiatives, plans, strategies, policy and more to be explored in a genuine two-way process. I strongly encourage people seeking to have their voices heard to be part of this process, and you can see what's currently on consultation by heading to yourvoiceourcoast.com. Something that's very useful, and residents certainly have found very useful, is the chemical clean-out event coming up. We're inviting residents to clear out their unwanted or hazardous chemicals from around their home and safely dispose of them for free at Council's chemical clean-out events this March. So residents can dispose of chemicals between 9 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. at Kincumber Waste Management Facility on Saturday the 4th and Sunday the 5th of March, and at Council's Long Jetty Depot on Saturday the 11th and Sunday the 12th of March. These events often experience very high turnout numbers each year, and it's fantastic to see so many residents eager to do the right thing and keep that material out of the landfills. Looking forward, 23, as I mentioned at the last meeting, a key focus of mine this year is to continue advocating to Council for the improvement of its service delivery and productivity. So you're not alone, Mr. Brooks. I'm confident in Council's ability to achieve these aims, to consolidate and improving our overall performance to better serve the Council community, the coastal community in 2023. And with that, we'll move to item 1.1, which is disclosures of interest. I have no interest to declare. I don't believe any of the staff have, so I have already checked. So I will now ask that we approve the resolution on the screen. Item 1.2, which is confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. As per clause 3751 of the Local Government Act, I confirm that the minutes are full and correct, and I will now resolve to adopt the resolution that is displayed on the screen. Notice 1.3, which is notice of intention to deal with matters in confidential session. We don't have any matters to discuss in confidential session tonight, so we will again resolve to adopt the resolution as shown on the screen. So there is a procedural motion that I now need to put. At the 13th of December 2022 meeting, the resolutions for item 2.4, request to prepare a planning proposal for 33 Gugandai Road, Narara, to amend the Central Coast Local Environment Plan 2022 were adopted. However, the minutes of the meeting did not include Resolution 7. Therefore, I now resolve to amend these minutes to record the resolution that is now shown on the screen as Resolution 7. We will now move back to the item proper, to the agenda proper, and the first substantial item on the agenda is item 2.1, which is the monthly finance report for December 22, and I believe the Chief Executive is going to actually consider December and January together.
Yeah. I'll just introduce actually 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3, which is the monthly financial report for December 2022, January 2023, and then the investment report for January 23. Council continues to perform strongly financially. Our year-to-date consolidated surplus is $37 million. A note of caution on that, our depreciation will rise in line with the increases in asset values that will be discussed in the latter report to Council on the audited financial statements later in the agenda. That increase in depreciation is a non-cash item, but it will decrease our surplus. But if we're able to reduce costs, it will then increase the amount of funds available to renew our assets. So ultimately, it's a reflection of the deterioration of our assets and the funds that we need to put aside to keep our assets in shape. Our total debt is now under $300 million, and we're building reserves to make a substantial special reduction in our largest emergency loan when it resets in December. Apart from Drainage Fund, which will be eventually absorbed by General Fund, there are positive unrestricted balances in each of our funds, though the Water Fund is very tight at the moment. Capital expenditure at the end of January was $74 million, which is a little bit under budget, $3 or $4 million under budget, and there will be pressure to deliver the balance of the program this year, but we'll be working very, very hard to deliver what we promised to the community in that space. But I should point out that the capital expenditure is $28 million better than it was at the same point last year. So overall, Council continues to travel very well financially.
Thank you. I have to say it is travelling well, and there's not a lot that I can add to that. There's just the slight words of caution that the Chief Executive has managed around our depreciation, which we have to account for, and that will ultimately reduce our bottom line to a minor, hopefully a minor extent, but nonetheless, we need to do that, and that just comes about because the assets we've got after revaluations are more valuable than they were, and so hence the depreciation line becomes bigger. So the only other comment I will make is that there's just been a small change which I asked for. If you have a look at the consolidated operating statement, or as I call it, the P&L, you'll see that under the full year, on the very last column, we've just changed the notation there where it was referring to the quarter, the last quarter result as we go to local government with. What I have asked to be included there is what the staff's view of is where are they going to end up the financial year. So it is the year-end forecast. So that's just been a small change, and that's to give us some guidance of where they think the organisation, and particularly those in the business units, where they think their business is going to end up by year end. So hopefully that brings a little bit more accountability and transparency to the numbers. With that, I don't have anything more to add to. I'm going to now just move to pass the items from 2.1 through to 2.3, pass those resolutions in globo, and make those as a decision of council. We now move to item 2.4, and I want to pause standing orders here in order to have a very special guest just to give some words to you. That guest is the Director of Financial Audit from the Audit Office of New South Wales, and I welcome her to give you some comments, and as you can see, she can speak absolutely freely and will comment on how we've been going. The only comment I will make is that I have worked with this young lady for some years in other councils, and I have to say we are dealing with one of the best in the business.
Thank you. So good evening, Mr Administrator, Chief Executive, Directors and members of the public. So thank you once again for your invitation for me to present my report on the conduct of the 2022 financial audit of Central Coast Council. So tonight I will be taking you through the results of our 2022 financial audit and a high-level snapshot of how your council performed compared to the industry benchmarks that are set by the Office of Local Government. But before doing this, I'd like to just briefly draw your attention to the work that our office, the New South Wales Audit Office, does. So not only do we do performance audits in the financial audit space, but we also do performance audits, and we report these to Parliament. I'd like to refer to you, and I'd like you to have a look on our website where you can see our annual work plan. So it's our 2022 to 2025 annual work plan, which we released in August last year. And essentially what this is the Auditor General showing her plan to look at performance audits across all sectors of state government and councils in the next 1 year looking forward, and then the 2 outer years after that to take you to 2025. So just to give you a feel, you can scroll down and you can see performance audits that are done by sector, but specifically for local government, we have some current performance audits in progress. Some of those include the regulation and monitoring of local government. We're also looking at the financial management and governance of local councils and focusing on Mid-Coast Council. And we've got a planning and management bushfire audit, which is just about to be tabled. So going forward for the 2022-23 year, we're planning to look at cybersecurity in local government and also coastal management reforms. And then there are some other audits planned for the years 2023 to 25, such as road asset maintenance, managing climate risks to assets and services, and other audits. So yeah, you can have a look there. But now I'll draw your attention to my main report, which is the report on the conduct of the audit. So after a long process and a lot of work, we've now completed our financial audit of the general purpose financial statements for Central Coast Council. So I am pleased to say that I will be issuing a clean opinion of your council's 2022 financial statements. So this means that the council's financial statements do contain no material statements and present fairly. So as you can appreciate, this has been a significant milestone for Central Coast Council, who haven't received a clean audit opinion for the last 2 years, so from 2020 and 2021, mainly due to the lack of sufficient and appropriate evidence to support infrastructure asset balances and Council's inability to reconcile the technical asset register to the fixed asset register. So there was significant effort this year that was put in by both management of council and the auditors and my team to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence to support the opinion to the financials. So I would also like to thank my team who are here today as well for the significant amount of work that's been done with council's management. We maintained our professional scepticism and we challenged management throughout the process to be able to provide this reasonable assurance. So a key focus of the effort by management was performing that reconciliation of its 30 June 2021 technical asset register to its fixed asset register. And this is really ensuring the accuracy and completeness of all the asset records, specifically roads, drains, water and sewer. And then after doing that, to then reassess the fair value of these assets. So this was a detailed exercise performed by council, involving a collaboration between the asset owners, the engineers, the finance team, and independent valuation experts were also engaged by council to assist in the project. So the opening balance of the 2022 financial statements were restated to reflect the new starting positions of these impacted assets, specifically roads, drainage, water and sewer. And then you'll see the impact of those prior period errors from all of that work going through the general purpose financial statements, resulting in a decrease of the asset balances and accumulated surplus by 5.6 million at 1 July 2020. And there was an increase in balances of infrastructure, property, plant and equipment, and the revaluation reserve by 102 million at 30 June 2021. So you can see the detail of those corrections through the financial statements in note G41 of the statements in your packs. So while noting there was obviously improvements from the prior year, I still did report 2 high-risk audit matters that carried over from the prior year. However, these were all addressed as part of my audit. So these matters did relate to the quality of council's fair value assessment processes over infrastructure, property, plant and equipment asset classes that weren't subject to comprehensive valuations, and the quality assurance and timeliness of financial reporting. However, it's still worth noting that council did close a number of high-risk issues that were raised last year and is definitely on a journey of continuous improvement. So if we now look at the performance ratios, the OLG sets, the Office of Local Government, sets what needs to be covered in the report on the conduct, which I need to sign off on. So there are 6 performance ratios, which are included in the financial statements, which we audit as part of the financial statements. So Central Coast has met the OLG benchmarks for 6 out of the 6 ratios set by OLG for 2022. So yeah, a good outcome. So now if you look at the income statement, council reported an operating result of 106.5 million for the year ended 30 June 2022. So that includes depreciation and amortisation expense of 169 million. So this was 88.4 million higher than the previous year's result. So the significant increase was due to many factors, but mainly the increase in rates and annual charges by 34.1 million due to the special rate variation of 13%. There was a decrease in employee benefits and on-cost expenses by 59.8 million, mainly due to the lower staff numbers during 2021 to 22. There was also sale of assets, so there was an increase in net gain from the disposal of these assets by 21.6 million from the properties sold and the proceeds. There was also an increase of other expenses by 14.7 million due to fair value decrement on investments. So after deducting the capital grants and contributions, the net operating result reduced to 40.4 million, and that was 106.4 million higher than the 21 negative or loss result of 66 million. So these results then enabled council to achieve a positive operating performance ratio of 7.73% in 2022, compared to not actually meeting the operating performance ratio last year of being more than 0%, actually in the last 2 years. Council also met the OLG benchmark in 2022 for rates and annual charges outstanding percentage, which is to be less than 5% for Metro Councils, of which Council achieved 4.75%. And that's an improvement from not meeting this ratio in the prior 2 years. And Council continues to meet their own sourced operating revenue ratio of 82.5%, which is above the benchmark set by OLG by more than 60%. So it really means that Council is not heavily reliant on external funding. So that was on the income statement. So now turning to look at the cash position of Council. So cash has total cash and investments of $652.1 million. So that's up by $167.7 million from $484 million in 2020-21. At 30 June 2022, Council reported a positive cash and investments balances of $221.2 million. So this was $83 million higher than the $83 million in the prior year, after deducting external restrictions of $430 million in 2022. So externally restricted balances mainly comprised of developer contributions, domestic waste, and the Water Supply Authority related funds. There's also internal allocations, and they're to be used by specific purposes by way of resolutions, which were $93.5 million in 2022, which was similar to the prior year. So looking at these cash balances that Council holds, it's enabled them to meet the OLG benchmarks for the unrestricted current ratio. So that was 1.8 times compared to the benchmark of 1.5 times. So this represents the Council's ability to meet its short-term obligations as they fall due. Council met the cash expense cover ratio, 7.08 months, which means Council can continue paying for its immediate expenses without additional cash inflows for 7 months, which is greater than the 3 months benchmark which is set by the Office of Local Government. Council also met the OLG debt service ratio, cover ratio of 3.98 times in 2022 compared to the benchmark of 2 times. And this was also an improvement to Council not meeting this ratio in the past 2 years. So overall, looking at how Council performed to the benchmarks, the industry benchmarks, we can see that Council has reported sound financial results as they've met 6 out of the 6 audited ratios. I would like to thank Mr Administrator, the Chief Executive Officer, all the directors here, and also the finance team that we worked closely with. I think we both worked very hard together, cooperatively, to arrive to this position to get a clean audit opinion. And there was, just acknowledging, there was a lot of work done on both ends, so it is a good outcome for Council. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I have to say, I'm delighted to hear your words. After having been around for the last couple of years, it's been a difficult journey one way and another. But nonetheless, I think it's really important that the community hears directly from our external auditors of exactly how they found the organisation. And if you look in depth at their report, you can still see that there's areas we need to improve on, and we will be working pretty hard on that. But overall, it is, in my view, a good result. And with that, I'll thank you for coming along, and thank you for talking to the community here. With that, I'll resume standing orders, and I believe the CEO would like to say a few words about his result.
I think it's the result of a lot of people, and when Dick Person, who was the original interim administrator, when the council was suspended temporarily, said that essentially we need to turn the financials of the organisation around. It was the most acute of the problems of the organisation, though it had many problems, but it was the one that was at a point in October 2020 when we were in a position where the council wasn't able to pay wages nor pay its creditors without unlawfully using cash. We've managed to significantly turn around those financials, and we've also been able to, after 2 years of qualified audits, received an unqualified audit. So that's been a significant turnaround, and that provides a sound basis to improve performance in a range of other areas in the organisation. We shouldn't underestimate the trauma that this journey has caused. Dick Person, the words that Dick Person quoted, is essentially 2/3 of the journey will be, of the financial turnaround will be done with changes within council, and roughly 1/3 would be done via additional rates and charges. And Carolyn from the Audit Office quoted around $30 million of additional rates and charges and about $70 million in reduced expenses. Turns around that $100 million of improved financial performance in the last 12 months. That provides a sound basis for the organisation to improve. Mr Brooks has commented on a range of areas, and certainly when you reduce roughly 1 in 4 employees in an organisation in very, very short time, $60 million in salaries and wages in a very short period of time, in an organisation that was already struggling, that significantly impairs your performance, and you've got to restructure and rebuild the organisation. And what we're starting to see now is improved metrics in a range of areas of the organisation. The financials was most acute, and we've been able to turn those to a range of other performance areas where we'll be striving to perform, and we're already starting to see improved performance in those areas. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. I have to say, as I mentioned to the Director of Financial Audit from Audit New South Wales, following successive losses when the council was basically declared bankrupt in November 2020, the council had successive losses, which I'll remind you of, 89 million in 1920, 71 million in 2021, and as you've just heard, a profit or surplus of 40 million in 21-22. Now, in achieving that, it was brutal to the organisation, as Mr. Farmer said. And fortunately for me, it is Mr. Farmer and the executive have to deal with staff who are traumatised by having to go through that intense downsizing process, restoring the finances, copying the comments from the community, and in a sense rightly so, but nonetheless, particularly our outdoor staff got hammered. Just because you were in a yellow shirt which had Central Coast Council on it was just a target. And they copped a lot of abuse which they didn't deserve because they had nothing to do with the losses that had been put in place by the previous senior people. So it is a very, very good result. As Mr. Farmer mentioned and the auditor mentioned, our cash position has improved dramatically as well. So we have all the metrics looking good from that point of view. But I would remind you that some of those things, as Mr. Farmer said earlier, we do now have to accommodate more depreciation into our expenditure line because our asset values basically went up. So effectively the depreciation line is calculated, if you like, in different asset classes by a percentage. So for example, this building might be depreciated at 2% of its valuation. So as you know, your own properties and everything else, valuations went up dramatically. And that was one reason why the new value in our balance sheet, which is now around $9 billion for our total value of assets, is the depreciation is calculated on that, and that number goes up. So that means we have to spend more money on maintaining and looking after those assets. So that's why you will see it there. So I don't believe that the current position is going to unfortunately continue at quite the same pace, but nonetheless I expect it will continue to still put us in positive territory. I would just take the opportunity now, because Mr. Farmer mentioned it, that we did as part of that, and it was a bank requirement to actually get sale of assets and to also put a 15%, which included the rate cap, rate increase through. I will draw you to attention if you haven't noticed it, but just for example, one of our neighbours, Hornsby Council, Canterbury Bankstown Council, and a range of other councils have applied to IPART for a rate increase for this coming financial year, kicking off on July 1. The average rate increase for those councils is 48%. So I just want to put the context into context of what the 15%, which was, I understand a big deal for a lot of people, but in context to what other councils are having to do without the financial problems, it was pretty small. So that is public information. If you go to the IPART website, you'll be able to see those in detail. So with that, I don't propose to say any more other than to sign off, thank the staff, and also publicly thank the New South Wales Audit Office because we did have a change of people there, and the new director who just spoke to you there has been a godsend in terms of working with us to actually achieve the outcome. And for those who understand the financial process of audit, you achieve more by working with people than trying to ping them for, where there's the slightest error and then telling them to fix it tomorrow. So it's a working through things, prioritising and so on. There's still a long way to go, and our performance, as has been pointed out, we are looking to improve now. So, but the first basis, like any business or any organisation, if you haven't got your financials right, you cannot do anything else. So the first port of call was get the financials right. We've achieved that. Now we move on to sorting out some of the other operational areas where we can actually get some benefit from the merger that occurred. With that, I'm going to now move those resolutions that are shown on the screen for item 2.4 and make those as a decision of council. We now move to item 2.5, which is the council decision on the administration of the 2024 ordinary election. Now, as I think is well known now, the Minister for Local Government and State Government announced that the Central Coast Council, along with the three other councils that are in administration currently, they would go to the next election that is put in place by the state government, which is September 2024, that we would fit into line with that. So the next election will be in September 2024, and that's been made clear now by the government. And I believe that the opposition at this stage have also concluded that that's the time frame that will now take place. We must, by the 13th of March, and this is a requirement under the Local Government Act, have in place or have appointed somebody to run that election. So we did go out for tender. There are some private providers out there. The very large majority of councils use the New South Wales Electoral Commission, and we have ended up wishing to go with the same crew. So this paper is asking me to sign off that we accept the tender from Electoral Commission New South Wales to run the election in September 2024. We are also, and I do plan to include, the referendum. Now that is a constitutional referendum, which means it is binding on the council to go ahead with it. Now I did hear a speaker speak very strongly that they wish to maintain the status quo. What I am doing is giving the opportunity for the community to think about what they really want from their council in the future, and they will decide what it is, not me, not the new council. The community will decide with a referendum that is held on that election day. Now, so we are clear, about what we are looking at, the proposal that the early administrator and myself as the acting chief executive officer at the time, there was a survey done of the community, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but I believe it was something in the order of 70-odd% were in favour of reducing the number of councillors, because the previous councillor, as Mr Pearson pointed out, time and time again, and for those who turned up at the council meeting, you would see that it behaved like a parliament. They were arguing and fighting between themselves, not focusing on governing the organisation. Most people will agree that a smaller group of people will actually work better than a parliament-style grouping. So I'm going to give the community the opportunity to choose whatever they want. So we will be considering 3 wards, which have to be by law plus or minus, I think it's 5%, it's a little 10% in terms of numbers of population. And those 3 wards will be obviously a north, a central and a southern ward, which breaks up the current sort of north-south kind of divide that we sometimes come across. And there will be 3 councillors per ward, which is a requirement. You have to have a minimum of 3 councillors per ward. And then those councillors will then elect their mayor as the current system works. So that's what I'm proposing to do it. So we can do that at the election for the extra cost of $230,000, and given the strength of the concern in the community going back 18 months or so, I think it is absolutely appropriate that we continue to ask that question and let the community decide how they want their Central Coast Council government into the future. With that, I intend to now move the recommendations for item 2.5 and accept the agreement from the Electoral Commission New South Wales. We'll now move to item 2.6, which is the Quarter 2 review. And first of all, I'll throw that to David, and there may be some other speakers there, I think.
Look, I'll hand over to Dr. Howe and Ms. Rakamalara, but essentially this is the report card on our performance for the first 6 months of the year, and we also adjust our budget. It's a document that reports on the organisational performance against objectives as well as how our budget is travelling. It's a little bit, the budget piece is a little bit repetitive given we do monthly financial reporting, but this particular report is required by law. We'll hand over to Dr. Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. This report, as you mentioned, provides an update on Council's progress with delivery of its adopted financial year 23 operational plan as at the 31st of December 2022. As shown on the screen, of the 153 actions that are identified in the plan, 15 have been completed and 119 are on track. So we're currently at about 87.5% performance rate year to date. 19 actions are either delayed or no longer required. This is due to unplanned interruptions, resourcing needed for other priority activities, more refined project scoping, or Council is awaiting information from other agencies. Highlights from this year include funding for 23 community projects, our summer safety education program, installation of an accessible changing facility at the Entrance Visitor Information Centre, collection of over 3,000 cubic metres of rack from Tuggerah Lake, and adoption of a preferred Gosford Waterfront and Stadium concept plan. Council has also introduced its new call centre software, which included a new council contact number, which is 4306 7900. And our pools and recreation centres have returned to pre-pandemic usage with over 450,000 visits so far this year. There's been progress with an affordable housing site at Ashton Street at the entrance and a food organics and garden organics solution for the Central Coast, both of which will be considered further by Council later in tonight's agenda. In relation to Mr Brooks's public forum address earlier tonight regarding development assessment, I can confirm that Council reports quarterly to the community on the mean assessment times through this quarterly report, annually to the Department of Planning, and periodically to the development industry. In relation to staffing, Central Coast Council processes more development applications than any other council in New South Wales. In 2021, in response to Council's financial position, staffing for development assessment was reduced by 35%. This has led to substantial increases in processing times and a backlog of development applications. Staff understand that this level of service is unsatisfactory. We're working hard to rectify the situation, including system and process improvements such as our consolidated local environmental plan and a single system of software for assessing applications. We have received funding support in addition to Council's contribution from the Department of Planning and the Greater Cities Commission, and we're working closely with industry to improve the quality of applications. I'll hand over to Ms Rakamalara in relation to Council's financial performance over this period. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. Just in relation to the finances, the quarterly review projects that we'll be in a better position than originally estimated as a result of actively reducing expenditure incurred in delivering services and as a result creating capacity to reinvest back into the community over the longer term. At the end of the second quarter of the financial year, Council continues to project a net operating surplus for the remainder of the year. The proposed Q2 adjustments will result in a budgeted operating surplus, excluding capital grants and contributions, of $15.8 million. This revised projected surplus continues to be an ongoing improvement from the projected position included in the original budget of $9.8 million and also the revised projected position after the first quarter. Some of the changes have resulted from an increased revenue as a result of income increases post-COVID, an improved investment return due to higher interest rates and successes in attracting grants. And expenditure is also projected to increase as we deliver those grant-funded projects and manage our services that are experiencing an increase in demand. Cost changes are impacting council in the same way they impact our community, with some increases in utility charges and administration costs. Our performance on capital items is also positive, with delivery of works and assets on track. The capital budget has seen a net increase of $4 million, which is the result of a number of minor movements, some of which are grant-funded, and a small number of larger changes. For example, 2 grant-funded roads projects have been deferred to a future year at the direction of the federal government, while additional funding for pavement restorations has been added as a result of the March and June 2022 natural disasters. This overall will result in a revised 22-23 full-year capital works program of $181.9 million. At the end of Q2, Council contained its recurrent expenditure within the limit of its operating income, meaning that we are operating on a financially sustainable basis, and that is we have enough money to pay our bills, deliver our services, and meet other commitments such as loan repayments. Our available cash is divided into restricted and unrestricted categories, with restricted cash being only available for the purpose for which it was received. For example, capital works for water and sewer, or specified grant-funded projects. During the quarter, Council created a new internal restriction for the repayment of our emergency loan scheduled for December this year. Ensuring we have adequate funds to retire this debt as early as possible will free up future cash flows for reinvestment back into community priorities. Unrestricted cash can be used in accordance with Council's budget that has been developed in partnership with the community as part of our operational plan. And as at Q2, the unrestricted cash in general fund totaled $71 million. As noted earlier by the CEO and in the report, depreciation is projected to increase in the order of approximately $30 million above the budgeted amount in the current financial year. As part of the audit process, a significant review was undertaken of asset registers, resulting in a number of adjustments to reflect actual assets held by the council. Further, in accordance with accounting standards, comprehensive asset valuations were undertaken for some asset categories, and indexation has been processed for other categories. The total revaluations and indexations on depreciable assets has therefore impacted the projected depreciation figure, and this adjustment will be further detailed in the next quarter review. Overall, it can be said that the financial crisis is well over and financial recovery is well on track. But we know we need to continue to look at what we do and how we do it so we can maintain financial sustainability into the future. We will continue to work with our community as we review services and service levels to ensure allocation of money and resources is aligned with the priorities of our ratepayers, and that we can continue to provide the services that our community deserves well into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rakamallara. A very extensive run-through of what the quarterly report tries to achieve. I can only concur with the speakers on that we are doing pretty well. There is one thing I still continue to work to try and change the style of the QT or the quarterly reports, because if you try to reconcile the numbers with our monthly reporting, you'd find it difficult. And the principal reason behind that is because for the quarterly reporting, the government requires us to book all our income from the rates and fees and charges area up front. We don't necessarily receive all the cash then because people pay it, as you know, quarterly, or whatever the rates will go out. Some pay it up front, but not the majority. So from an accounting point of view, we book it all up front. But our costs, of course, go out month by month by month. With our monthly reporting, the way we manage that to make it look more real, or make it more real, is we take that total revenue number from the rates and we divide it by 12, and we give an equal instalment of 12 a month to each of those monthly reports. That means what you're seeing is that's our income, even though we may have received some cash offside, but from an income point of view, we're actually saying We've received 1/12 of the rates income this month, and here's our expenditure against that. So it gives much greater transparency and clarity as to what's happening. One of my beliefs is that with all councils, when it's required quarterly, the Office of Local Government gives you 2 months to put it in. So the first time that a set of councillors, or even indeed senior management in most councils, see any financial report could be November, at the end of November. So you can't manage anything like that. You have to keep on top of things. The same thing applies at the end when you get to your quarter 3. So when you get to the end of March 30th or 31st, generally speaking, you've got 3 months left with which you can make some changes. But if the report at that point of time doesn't come out till the end of May, it's leaving you less than 30 days to actually do anything. So you can see that monthly reporting adds a huge benefit to A, the community, and B, the staff, by being able to keep track and following things. So I am trying to get the government to change that, to make monthly reporting the mandatory thing. I absolutely agree with all the other metrics that have been mentioned that are measured on a quarterly basis. I'm only referring to that component of the financials. But with that, obviously, we have to comply with what the government requires at this stage. So with that, I'm more than happy to resolve the recommendation supporting the forwarding of the quarter 2 review to the Office of Local Government. Now we move on to item 2.7. This is something that I've had some involvement with many years ago, and I know Mr. Bolgoff has as well, but this is the Food Organics and Garden Organics, which is FOGO, is the term that goes by, and what we're planning to do with that. And I think you've got a little presentation.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Administrator. I've got a few short slides to go through. Just in relation to going back in 2020, there was a resolution of council that adopted the waste resource management strategy, and in that it identified that the council is to investigate and plan for large-scale waste processing for FOGO, look at the technology options, look also at the suitability of council-owned facilities, and as well as the delivery methodology in how we would deliver the outcome for that. I'm just going back, next slide please. We've got a 3-bin system, which is your red bin has the processable waste, the yellow, which is your recycling, and our green bin, which has the garden organics, and that gets processed and used in the landscape industry at the moment. You see on the slide, in the red bin, it's very clear that there's 47% of what goes in the red bin is food and garden organics that we can have diverted from the red bin into a green bin system once we have the technology to be able to do that. Through the reporting that we've provided, we've had some assistance from consultants, and we've identified that in-vessel composting is the best way forward in processing the FOGO. What's on the slide above here just identifies the matrix that we went through. So it was a thorough process in assessing all the different technologies, with in-vessel composting being the most advantageous. It also identified that Buttondry Waste Facility would be the best location, and a public-private partnership would be the way to undertake that process. Next slide. This is also included in the report. This is showing a detailed 7-phase step. There's obviously still other reports that would come to council before we would invest in this the process. But this, we're looking at going into a detailed technical and financial feasibility, looking at the business case development, and then going through tender planning and design. So I won't read all of that out. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is a little bit of the timing and the journey. So, as I said, did start in 2020. There was the New South Wales Government 2041, which was mandated that FOGO is the way to progress in the technology side. We had to go through a process in engaging consultants to undertake the work and looking at all those things that I've just been through. And I'm seeking from council tonight to go to that detail stage, and then the last phase is that delivery. And that's presentation, Mr. Administrator.
No, thank you, Mr. Borgoff. I have to say I'm particularly excited by this project in a past life, and it's it's about a decade ago, in fact, now. I did actually go to Europe to actually look at some of the means by which the Europeans are actually handling their organic waste streams, which includes food. At the old Warringah Council, which was part of a thing called NESROC, which was 4 councils in a partnership owning a landfill, which only basically handled, basically like Buttonderry does at the moment, only handles the actual the green waste from one, from one point of view. We do look after the other side at Buttonderry, but from a green waste point of view, Kimbrickie, that's all they did. And we looked at, can we get involved with exactly the same technology that is being looked at here, which is the in-vessel type technology, and you've got sort of aerobic or anaerobic type digestion, to which actually breaks down, the bad bits in the food, so called, because that's where you get, some of the bad bugs, if you like, grow. So it's quite complicated and it's quite technical as to how you go through that. The other part of the process, as Mr. Bolgoff mentioned, which is the way to do this would be through a public-private partnership with a private supplier. That is exactly the model that is utilised in Europe, and it's also the model that we were looking at at Warringah in the Northern Beaches at the time. The reason it didn't proceed in the Northern Beaches was because of the amalgamation, and the shareholders, which was Mossman, Manly and Pittwater, all broke up and became one council. So there was some other issues there, I'll put it that way. When you look at the public-private partnership, for those who are concerned about how things go about, and that's why Mr. Bolgoff's timeline is getting the technical stuff now, looking at the models, getting the costs together, because to achieve a public-private partnership, you've got massive hurdles to overcome from the state, because the Treasury actually have a whole set of rules around public-private partnerships for good reason, because, government entities aren't that great at getting into bed with a private partner who, generally speaking, has got the smarts over them when it comes to the business side. So there are a lot of rules around that, and it does mean that in this case you have to jump through a lot of hoops and hurdles, and it's managed every step of the way, if you like. I regard that as a good thing. Whilst it's onerous, I think it's a good thing from a public point of view to ensure that the public monies that will get invested eventually into these facilities, that they are used properly, and the vehicles that are actually set up actually do deliver what they say they're going to do. So I'm delighted that we can move this forward, because A, we have to, because it's being mandated by the state, B, that it's an exciting way forward to actually improve our waste handling and to actually achieve a lot more than we currently are doing. So with that, I'm happy to move that forward, Mr. Bolgoff, and we'll endorse and accept those resolutions that are shown on the screen. Item 2.8, the submission on the draft Central Coast Regional Transport Plan. I believe, Dr. Howe, you're going to say a few words on that.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Transport for New South Wales has invited public submissions on its draft Central Coast Regional Transport Plan. This report recommends that Council make the submission provided at Attachment 1. The proposed submission is generally supportive of the draft plan and recommends that Transport for New South Wales work with Council to implement the objectives of the Central Coast Community Strategic Plan and make amendments to the plan to address safety and environmental concerns and to clarify funding responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a submission that the staff have made, and having looked through it, I agree with the staff's views. So I'm going to support this submission going to Transport for New South Wales. So with that, I'll formally accept the recommendations as shown on the screen. Item 2.9 is the critical road-related grants and funding and associated delivery methodology. This is a paper that I requested from Mr. Bolgoff because I felt it would be helpful if we could encompass roads, as there's such a topic. I suppose if it's not every second one, it's certainly probably, every 2 and a bit people that actually talk to me about roads and potholes and so on. I think what I wanted was to have something that encapsulates where our funding goes, how much funding we've actually got, our process for detailing what gets what in terms of roads, our prioritisation matrix and everything else, and also finally that flows through to where we've got our assets and what's being actually addressed at the time is shown interactively, if you like, on the internet via our asset module. So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Bolgoff to just talk briefly about some of the things in there, because it's quite, not that complicated, but some quite big numbers in it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Administrator. It may not be brief. I have got a few slides to go through. I have got the issues that we've had is certainly unprecedented weather. So we've had a number of storm events in February, March and July, which caused widespread flooding. We had embankment failures, landslips, pavement damage, and on top of that, the COVID impacts. So we've had to redeploy resource to manage the emergency work, so it's taken away from the normal operations and level of service to go and do other matters to deal with that emergency service. We've had private and public sector impacts in relation to staff, certainly issues in getting materials and resources, and supply chain issues in getting some of that materials as well. Contractor availability in getting projects undertaken has been an issue, and as is indicated in one of the reports tonight, we didn't get any tenders for one of our projects that we put out to tender. And on top of that, there has been some cost escalations. So what have we had? At the moment, we've got 101 slip sites that we're managing, and the total estimated work to bring those sites back up to scratch is between $55 and $70 million, which is a huge effort, as well as the impact on our road pavement. What's shown on the slide up above is what we're proposing to put out to the public that will identify our slip sites, and this will be an interactive map that we can see some of the progress in relation to those, and that is on top of our capital works mapping that we currently do. Just briefly, the slide above indicates some short, medium and long-term work. Obviously the pothole patching, we do get some criticism, Mr. Administrator, in relation to us going out, filling a pothole and it reoccurring again, but that is a temporary measure. We're moving towards the heavy patch, which is a photo on the right, where we take a portion of the road out and replace that with some asphalt material, so that it doesn't reoccur again. And then obviously the longer term solution in relation to looking at our pavement management system and prioritising those works to do entire road renewals, which would be resurfacing of the road in spray seal or asphalt as well. We've been lucky that we've been able to collaborate very well with all levels of government, with us, state and federal, and there's been a number of meetings, and we constantly do meet with those. And what I've extracted out on the slide is in the report, but a little bit of what the Australian government has been providing or committed to on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, the New South Wales government has also provided or committed to. I will point out that we were notified today of an additional grant funds for Wiseman Ferry Road in the order of $8 million. So we certainly thank the Australian and New South Wales government for what they're providing and assisting us in the community. I just to mention, just in relation to our pavement management system, it does allow us to make optimised decision, because we do collect information and the data on the roughness, rutting and cracking across our whole network, and we've just about completed another review of condition across the entire network, which will improve when we can time certain projects so we can get best bang for our buck. We also have staff that go out and validate those, so it's not just relying on a computer black box in that sense. The next slide, as you indicated, you did want to see some of the financials. This identifies our long-term financial plan, where we've got on the the base, we've got the years going forward. And I know you might not be able to see, but essentially there's expenditure in the order of over $40 million per year in our road renewal area, with some of that upgrade. And that little bit of spike in that first 4 years is the commitment from the Australian government in relation to the $40 million package. And that is predominantly road renewals, approximately about 60 road renewals and 2 upgrade projects. Next slide, please. So this slide fits in with a little bit of what the Office of Local Government benchmark and what was mentioned earlier today. We've got on the x-axis, or going across the page, the years, so the financial years, and if you take the right-hand side, and that vertical axis, that's the infrastructure backlog, and up around that red mark is around 5%, and without that additional funding from Australian Government and New South Wales Government, we will be tracking at 5% for a number of years. If we look at the yellow line, that's with the $40 million investment, so that brings us down in about, well, it doesn't quite get us down to 2% ever, which is certainly the aim. I might point out that if we had an additional investment of around $12 million over 4 years, we would be meeting that 2% infrastructure backlog within a 4-year period. Next slide. Thank you. Whilst there's all this happening and the impact, we have had to make changes. So we've had to put additional project management resources in there. We've stood up a dedicated natural disaster team to be able to deal with all those additional funds, because if you imagine if we stayed the same, we wouldn't be able to deliver the huge investment that's being provided. We've had to change the way we undertake procurement. So we have looked at a way to get contractors in, and then they can provide a estimate or provide their detailed price, and we would get a quantity surveyor check that. So we've got in the process of appointing that panel. And just in relation to some of the operational work, we've been able to use existing resources, council staff, to project manage contractors to do that additional work. And this is my last slide, Mr. Administrator, so it's just around communication. We are trying to make sure we do things like this. We do deal with the media, social media updates, where we can, newsletters. We have got what's on the screen at the moment, our capital works mapping, and I mentioned earlier we're also looking at putting in the slip site and the natural disaster works. And I'd certainly like to thank all staff in what they do to deliver the work, and you've mentioned some of the maintenance staff and the capital staff, and there's also some of the planning work that happens behind the scenes. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Borgoff. Well, I hope when people read that paper, because I think it's well worth reading, because it puts in context just how council, in this particular case the Central Coast Council, actually manages its funding, what it's trying to achieve, and the fact that we still need to, as Mr. Borgoff pointed out, to meet the benchmark number of 2% of the backlog, we still need some extra money. So there have been some extra from the council paper. There's been a couple of extra resolutions put in there, resolution 2 and 3. The first one, I have to say, I'm also very supportive of Mr. Borgoff's comments about the staff. I think overall, during this period, the staff have done an amazing job. And when you look at the concern that the community had, and kind of rightly so, but given the original condition of these roads, and a clear point to be remembered, spending that 40 million and then another 12 million doesn't give you a Rolls-Royce road. It just restores the kind of road that was there previously to what it was. So if it was originally a road that was just with a bit of tar seal over the top and not really designed for heavy traffic and so on, you're not getting a brand new, fully constructed, brand new road for that. You're only getting that road up to its to that original standard. the new capital that would be required across the Central Coast to actually upgrade all of our roads to the appropriate standard, Mr. Goldberg, I would imagine is almost into the billions of dollars. It is certainly a huge number. So don't be under any illusion when we hit that 2% that you're getting roads that are of a Rolls-Royce standard right across the patch, similar to the M1, for example. You're getting the road restored to what it was beforehand without potholes and so on. And the maintenance side, as Mr. Bolgoff pointed out, those crews have just been going sort of day and night to try and keep up with the demand. And fortunately, the spell of wet weather, until again a week or so ago, has enabled a lot of progress to be made. So with that, I'm just going to support those addition of those two extra resolutions, and we will be writing to the federal and state governments in order to try and secure that extra 12 million in order for us to be able to get down to that 2% number, which is the benchmark set by the Office of Local Government. So with that, I'll move those recommendations for 2.9. And we now move to item 2.10, which is exhibition of the draft Central Coast Local Housing Strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Council officers have prepared a draft local housing strategy for public exhibition. The draft housing strategy has been developed based on research about the existing conditions for housing on the Central Coast and input on a housing discussion paper that Council released last year. Further community input is now sought on the draft housing strategy itself. The strategy identifies 10 key challenges for housing on the Central Coast. These challenges relate to the pressure population growth is placing on the local housing market, the lack of diversity in that market, particularly for affordable housing, accommodation suitable for older people and people with disability, and small houses, as well as the environment of the Central Coast, which constrains greenfield development, presents significant natural disaster hazards, and is highly valued by our community. The local housing strategy is guided by the New South Wales Government's Central Coast Regional Plan, guidelines for developing local housing strategies, and the Darkinjung Development Delivery Plan, as well as Council's adopted policy position. Should Council resolve to adopt the draft strategy following public exhibition, it will inform changes to planning controls, local place planning, and policy and advocacy positions. The strategy identifies 10 strategies to address local housing challenges. These strategies are grouped under the themes of delivery and supply, infrastructure and servicing, housing diversity and resilience, both in terms of the housing stock itself and the communities that live in it. The draft strategy will be exhibited for not less than 60 days. It will be available online on Council's Your Voice, Our Coast webpage. There will also be a series of community, industry and government agency information sessions held for public input. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. Look, again, this is a very important document, and as was mentioned earlier in the meeting tonight, it's very important that people do take the opportunity to read these, comment on them, and get the information back. The whole process is designed to be a two-way interchange, and unless we get people interested, it's very hard sometimes to get the viewpoints that some of the people have got out there into something. Now, it is a draft at this stage, so quite happy to put it out there without any further comment, and we'll look forward to the, I guess there'll be some consultation, actual meetings, yep. So there'll be actual meetings we can go to where staff will explain it and questions can be asked, and I would certainly again encourage people from the community to attend those meetings when they're made public. So with that, I'm just going to move to accept the recommendations that are shown on the screen to get that draft housing strategy out for exhibition. And we'll move to item 2.11, which is the outcome of the Affordable Housing Agreement with Pacific Link Housing Limited. Now, for those who attended council meeting, I think it might have been 2 meetings ago, you'll recall that we actually proposed that we actually give a site at the entrance to Pacific Link for the leasehold of $1 in order for them to construct up to 50-odd affordable housing units or accommodation. They went to explore how they would do that over the last couple of months, And because they're actually going to borrow money to actually help them develop those units, the banks they were dealing with would not support lending against leasehold land. So that means, of course, it makes it difficult if the asset's built on it, on a leasehold land, and if the bank wanted to gain it, they might control the building, but they don't control the land under it. So you can see from a risk point of view, the banks weren't happy. So this paper's come about because we will now sell the site for $1 to Pacific Link. That will then enable them to have free title to the land, and they now will be able to get a loan to be able to build the accommodation as they've promised. Now, there will be a clause in the agreement whereby should they not build it within 3 years, then they are required to sell it back to us for $1. So Pacific Link are a very, very good organisation. They do some fantastic work up here on the coast. They are coast-based, they're a coast organisation, and I think they'll do a fabulous job with this. So I do propose to go along with this. Now, there is a consequence by selling that asset for $1. It is valued, if you've heard about the valuations of our assets, it was done earlier for our whole asset base. Well, the value from this particular site, and including the building on it and so on, is in fact $2.1 million. So if we sell it for $1, we have to book that loss. It's not cash because there's no cash involved in this, but what it shows is we've disposed of an asset at a loss, so off our P&L it comes off a bottom line. So where we're, for example, showing $37 million as a surplus, as the Chief Executive pointed out at the end of February, if this transaction had occurred in February, then that bottom line would be $35 million. So hopefully you can follow that. So with that, I'm going to support the recommendations here. That is, we transfer the land to Pacific Link for the contracted price of $1. Now we move to item 2.11, the outcome of the exhibition of the planning proposal related to 4346 the Esplanade, Ettalong Beach. And I hope, Dr. Howell, you'll be able to put at rest some of the comments that were raised during the public speaking earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report relates to a proposal to amend planning controls at 43 to 46 the Esplanade, Ettalong Beach. The site is located on the eastern edge of the B2 business zone on the Esplanade, on the site of the current Ettalong Beach Motel. It's proposed to amend the height of building control on the site from 11.5 metres to 17 metres, subject to a minimum lot size of 3,000 square metres. This means that this height limit is only achievable if the lots within the subject area are consolidated. The proposal also provides for an increase in the floor space ratio from 1:1 to 1.75 to 1, again subject to a minimum lot size of 3,000 square metres. 119 submissions were received on the planning proposal, with around 80% of those submissions objecting to the original proposal. Key issues raised included overshadowing of the beach, height transition to the beach and surrounding residential areas, loss of views and coastal erosion. These concerns were reflected in addresses from Mr. Ellis and Mr. Gillis as part of tonight's public forum. The impact of overshadowing views and neighbouring property has been addressed through controls in a site-specific development control plan. The site is outside the coastal hazard line and therefore not subject to expected coastal erosion. Concerns have also been raised about potential flooding of the basement car park, inadequate local facilities and impact on local character. Basement car parking has been removed from the final proposal. There is a range of public infrastructure proposed for the local area, and the proposal is considered to be consistent with the character statement for the Ettalong Foreshore Precinct in the adopted DCP. Lastly, concerns were raised about the capacity for people to have input into the proposal. The consultation process was undertaken in accordance with the Department of Planning's Gateway process and Council's adopted Community Participation Plan. Over 100 submissions were received, which have informed the final proposal before Council tonight. The development concept is generally consistent with surrounding development and provides for articulation of the street frontage and central area to soften the facade and maintain views. This is the last stage in the planning proposal process. Should Council resolve to adopt the recommendation, Council staff will arrange for amendments to planning controls to be made. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. Well, given that I had some comments directly from members of the community about this project, I did take the time to go down to the site and walk around quietly and have a look. I did have some concerns, which I came back and talked with the staff, but they have assured me that through the site-specific plan and some of the development controls that are going to be put in place, some of those comments that were raised by speakers earlier, I'm confident will be okay as a result of this. Looking at overall at the site, it is a very, if you like, the whole area between the two roads, it's quite constrained. And I think this type of development there is appropriate and it does fit in. Now, other concerns were made to me about this is the forerunner, or this could open the gates for other developments of similar scale and size in other parts, but I'm reassured that the LEP does not allow that to occur. So again, I'm relaxed the fact that the current planning controls do support keeping the rest of the along the foreshore there in situ. So I'm comfortable with going ahead with this. I think the staff here have done a good job in terms of actually protecting, but allowing consolidation and allowing the economic prospects there for that little part of Vettelong to actually go ahead. So with that, I am going to support the recommendations that are in the paper and as shown on the screen. Item 2.13, the Gosford Waterfront. I think, Dr. Howe, you might have just some comments to make on the interpretation of the numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This was a consultation process that received a huge amount of input from the community. We were really pleased to see the amount of feedback that community members provided across the board. From a community engagement and analysis perspective, the feedback was considered to be substantially positive. And also note that there are a number of highly useful suggestions that came through from the community about opportunities to improve the concept plan, which will be considered as part of the next stage of this process, should Council resolve to support it tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. The Chief Executive and I did actually attend a pop-up which we had at Leagues Park on Australia Day. And we were both there, I think, Mr. Farmer, for about 3 hours. And we had a constant stream of people coming through. And I can honestly say I did not have one person expressing any concern with the proposal. The majority of the people coming were in actual fact lived in some of the high rises back up the hill. And whilst they admitted that the new development may block some of their views, what was persuading them to support the opportunity was very much the fact of creating a hub and a precinct where they could go in the evenings or during the day and enjoy the sort of the outlooks and everything else. So at this stage, we did approach both sides of politics about funding to pursue this. We are still in discussions with the Greater Cities Commission about funding to support some of the preliminary work and studies that need to be undertaken. Labor has committed $8 million should they be elected at the state election later this month. And if we have that opportunity, we will replenish that fund with monies from those grants should we be successful in getting them. At this point in time, Given the momentum, we have a reserve which is suitable, internally restricted reserve there, which is suitable for this, and I deem it appropriate that we actually utilise some of that money to get things underway. Because again, it's a little bit like a public-private partnership. In order to get T Corp, the Bank effectively of New South Wales, of government, for them to support spending money in these areas, they must see a robust business case. They must understand the roading and transport issues, and they must understand the environmental issues, if any. So we need to get that work done. That's what the original $8 million was about. And it's not until you've got that it becomes a true candidate for being funded. And as you know, I'm very strong on the fact that under the 6-city strategy, and you look at the other cities out there, Newcastle, Wollongong, Sydney CBD, Parramatta, and the Aerotropolis or Western Sydney, and then you've got us. And all those cities have received very large amounts of government funding. And we are still, apart from some sound funding in the roads area, we have been somewhat lacking in getting that money. And this would be a very good project to help kickstart the Central Coast. So with that, again, I will resolve to adopt the resolutions to release those funds as shown on the screen. Item 2.14, which is the street design manual and technical specification. I think, Dr. Howe, this is one of your specialties.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Council officers have prepared a draft street design manual for public exhibition. The draft manual, along with the accompanying landscape work specification, aims to ensure a consistent and coordinated approach to public domain projects and have been developed in consultation with relevant council units and New South Wales government agencies. These documents are intended to provide guidance on how to develop a more complete approach to street design to make our streets safe and attractive, green and healthy, and community focused. Should Council resolve to publicly exhibit the draft manual and specifications, it's proposed that they be exhibited for not less than 28 days prior to a report being brought back to Council for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. Again, it's a draft plan going out, and I hope we will get some good community input into it. And again, these are plans and policies that we're getting together now, which unfortunately haven't occurred in the past, and we're doing a lot of catch up, if you like. And particularly when you look at what we've got to do with some of our smaller town centres, like a Tukley, for example, which was out there yesterday. We do need to try and improve them. And so getting a consistent standard right across all our small cities, if you like, is a good step forward. So very happy to get this out for consultation, and with that I'll approve the resolutions as shown on the screen. And now we move to 2.15, which is the rationalisation of the long-term ownership and management at the car parking building in Woy Woy. And Dr. Howe, I think you'll be able to answer some of the concerns again that have been raised in public speakers tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. As you mentioned, this proposal relates to car parking at Woy Woy Town Centre. At present, there are around 440 shopper car parks currently owned by Dexus Property Group that service Deepwater Plaza, and around 700 commuter car parks that are currently council-owned and leased to Transport for New South Wales until 2065, so a significant period of time. Council currently has an option over 220 of the shopper car parks in the Deepwater Plaza car park, which it can exercise in December of 2032. What the owner of the Deepwater Plaza and Transport for New South Wales have indicated is that they're motivated to retain car parking for shoppers and for commuters. There's no value in council being involved in their parking arrangements, and the current lease to Transport for New South Wales allows Transport for New South Wales to determine whether or not to charge for commuter parking in the commuter car park, regardless of whether that lease is with council or with a third party. The proposal before council is that council give up its option to acquire those Deepwater Plaza car parks in the future and to provide for a 12-month period to negotiate around the transfer of the lease from with Transport for New South Wales to the owner of Deepwater Plaza. And it recommends that these transactions require the owner of Deepwater Plaza to retain an equivalent number of car parks in both the commuter and the shopper parking arrangements. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
So, Dr. Howe, can I just confirm, because I think that's an important point, in the final contractual arrangements, Deepwater Plaza will need to confirm they are going to retain 440 whatever it is car parks, is it?
The arrangements in the recommendation before you relate to the 220
on the option.
shopper car parks
Yep.
that council has an option over
Yep.
and the
option.
700 commuter car parks that council currently leases to Transport for New South Wales until 2065.
Right, gotcha. So some of the concerns that were raised by the community, I think, have been taken care of. It's important to note that council didn't instigate this. We were approached by the prospective purchasers of Deepwater Plaza because, again, back to the commerciality of things, for them to obtain finance to purchase things, they have a risk to manage, which is the fact that we had an option as council on 200 and whatever it is, 220 of those car parks for them. And as for most of you who know, who frequent the area, it's like one big car park, and the fact it's in these little bits and pieces and cut up makes it quite difficult to sort of manage. Now, somebody raised the point about charging. Right now, both the Plaza and Transport for New South Wales can charge. We couldn't stop them. So there isn't an issue of that. And then you think about what are the commercial demands these organisations have. You have Transport for New South Wales that has a 42 years from now, 42 years of lease to retain the 700 car spaces there for parking for commuters. You have a plaza that has a total of 440, including the 220 of ours, which is available for their shoppers. It is completely against the interests commercially of either entity to get rid, as someone suggested, build apartments. Well, the plaza can't operate as a plaza and build apartments on there. Now, you might ask, well, what if they sell the plaza for residential? Well, then, if you don't need the shopping component, then you won't need all those spaces. So you can see it's a self-policing thing. And it frees up, some dollars for the council, which will then go back towards that community. So, looking at it, Transport for New South Wales, the Woy Woy station is going to be integral or important for a fast rail or faster rail. Again, it's highly unlikely, given they've got 42 years, and I suggest, looking at the audience, there's not many of us that would be wanting to use that car park at that point in time when 42 years it disappears. So I can't see any risk there, because if there's going to be a railway station there, which I strongly suspect there will be, then they are going to require at least that number of commuter car parks. But what it does, it frees that up to be in one ownership, and it is then managed properly for the car parking to benefit those businesses. And as I said, you cannot rule out, for example, as Transport for New South Wales do now, at other car parks, i.e. Gosford, you get charged unless you can use your Opal card there to demonstrate that you've arrived by train or bus. So you can see that that will happen regardless of whether it's leased or it's owned or whatever. So I have looked at the risks involved here. I'm quite satisfied that there are no risks for the community long term with loss of car parking. I believe it will be beneficial in the long term, because you will have people who have the direct interest in providing parking to sustain their businesses able to operate in that area. So with that, I'm going to agree to the resolutions and support that proposal from the staff as shown on the screen. Item 2.16, which is the management of natural disaster site at Wiseman's Ferry with Hawkesbury City Council. We've been lucky enough to be the beneficiaries again of the state government of getting some funding, as have Hawkesbury City Council, which I might add got quite a lot more than us, but anyway, we won't play competition here. But the two areas abut each other, and just common sense says that the work should be managed by one party, rather than two of us trying to manage a site alongside each other and sort of having different days for road closures and all the rest. So we're quite happy, and the work's been done from a contractual point of view. We will sort of delegate, if you like, our monies and we will give Hawkesbury our specifications, and they will manage the whole process. So they will take all the money, but they will deliver the project for them and for us. So this report is necessary just to put that into operation, and I'm very happy to endorse those recommendations, because two councils working together to do this is infinitely better than both of us scrabbling over, when the road should be closed or not closed. We move to item 2.17, which is the Administrative Expenses and Facilities Report. Ms. Rakalamara.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Members of the community might recall that previous reports on the administrator's expenses have been provided during the term of administration. However, as a result of feedback, we have taken an opportunity to provide more detailed information and also to realign the reporting periods to financial year cycles. Council has undertaken a number of actions to increase transparency with the community on this matter. We have proposed to amend the relevant policy, planned an audit of compliance with the earlier policy, responded to multiple community queries, and provided documents under the GIPA regime. The report to Council tonight provides a comprehensive data set that goes above and beyond the requirements of the applicable policies and regulations. The letter of appointment of the administrator outlines the salary to be paid and the expenses to be covered by Council. Over the 4 periods covered by the report, there were a number of changes in public health orders which enabled the administrator to more actively engage with the local community face-to-face and to participate in the return of regular local government meetings, conferences and advocacy opportunities across the state, which had been suspended or deferred during COVID lockdowns and public health restrictions. Of interest is the change in the cost of accommodation on the Central Coast, which have risen in line with changes to public health orders, resulting in the removal of COVID and time commitment related discounts, which were not able to be sourced elsewhere. The period is also adjusted by the timeliness of invoice payments over the Christmas break, resulting in accommodation costs for 7 months being included in that period. Accommodation is offered in line with the Crown Employees Conditions of Employment Award, which is applicable as the administrator is an appointee of the state government. This award provides for accommodation for temporary work locations for periods greater than 35 days. Accommodating the administrator within the LGA has multiple benefits, including increased participation in local meetings and events, particularly those outside traditional business hours, and the ability to engage with the local community face-to-face. This expenditure is within the budgeted parameters and in accordance with the policy and relevant award. It is also subject to audit on a biannual basis. The suspension of councillors has continued the result of net savings to council in relation to total expenses and facilities. In response to the questions posed during the public forum, I can confirm that Mr Brooks has made 7 representations to council on this topic since mid-December and has received a total of 6 written responses, while this report covers the remaining outstanding issues. Mr Brooks has also had a detailed and robust conversation with myself on this topic. In summary, the administrator is remunerated and provided with facilities at the direction of the state government and within the relevant award and policy guidelines, for which there have been no instances of non-compliance. I recommend that if any member of the community is uncomfortable with the direction of the state government as outlined in the letters of appointment, then that concern be raised directly with the Office of Local Government. Council will continue to comply with the terms of the administrator's agreement. Also, just a final reminder that the draft councillor expenses and facilities policy is on public exhibition until March the 6th, and we would welcome all feedback on that policy. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Racklamara. I won't make any comment on this since it's, you, I think, have spoken adequately to it. So with that, I am just going to move to accept that report and move the resolution that is shown on the screen. We move to item 2.18, which is the Community Support Grants Program for the period 14th of November to the 31st of December last year. And this is a program that runs over the course of the year. It has a budget of about $300,000 in it. And I have always expressed concerns that we never seem to quite get the money out the door. But I'm pleased to see that we are making progress this year and that we are doing quite well, in fact. So there's a range of beneficiaries, all well-deserving. I won't go through them all, but they're all well-deserving, and it's great to be able to see the council is able to support, in a small way, a number of these organisations which do such good work out in our community. So with that, I will approve the expenditure that I'm being asked to today, which is $37,933. And just to remind people out there that we still have $118,000 in that fund. So if you know anybody who might want some money, please get them to put in an application. But with that, I will approve those recommendations for those people as shown on the screen. Item 2.19 is the Facade Improvement Support Program. Another great program where we match dollar for dollar up to a maximum of $5,000 with business owners to actually improve the facade of the street front and if you like, the aesthetics of how their business looks from a shop front or a street front perception. There's a number there ranging in quite small amounts from 400 odd up to the full 5,000 as the criteria allow for. It's a total of $120,000 in that program. So on the assumption that we've only spent $99,000 this one, there's still some more that people could go for. So again, if you know people or businesses out there that might find beneficial, then I suggest you get them to get in touch with the council and see if they can put in an application which might be successful. I'm keen that when we have these programs, we actually get the money out the door. So it's designed to improve things, and unless it gets spent, it's kind of wasted. So please take the affirmative action and get out there and do it. So with that, I will approve those recommendations that are shown on the screen for those businesses. Item 220, which is the variations to development standards. I think Dr. Howe might have one word to say on it, but it's probably not much. It's a standard report that comes out, every, 6 months, is it, or 3 months?
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. It's a quarterly report
yeah,
that we're required to provide regarding variations to our development standards. So this quarter there were 33 determinations that included a variation to a development standard. 29 of those were determined by staff and 4 by the local planning panel. And as is usually the case, they typically involve variations to building height, particularly on our steep blocks, or floor space ratio. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'm happy to move the recommendations for that item of 2.20 and accept the recommendations that are shown on the screen. We move to item 2.21, which is the meeting record of the Catchments to Coast Advisory Committee meeting, which was held on the 14th of December. And I have to say, this is what I see as a fabulous example of a council committee actually helping council do the job. And I think, do you want to say something about this? I think you probably should.
Thank you,
That's your area.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Council officers have been working closely with local flood-affected community members around Tuggerah Lakes and the Catchment to Coast Advisory Committee to identify improvements to entrance opening triggers. In response to a report from council staff to the 14th of December 2022 Advisory Committee meeting, the committee resolved to formally request that council implement an additional intervention trigger for entrance management. This would mean that the actions that are described in the interim entrance management procedure with respect to the relevant entrance condition at the time would also be implemented if there is a flood level of 7 metres above the Australian height datum on the Wyong River at Yarramalong and a flood level of 6 metres AHD on Arimba Creek at Kangiangi. And this is really aimed at providing some advance warning of actual river heights and their likely impact on the lake, in addition to the warnings that we currently utilise from the Bureau of Meteorology.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Howe. So the net result of that is it means that the council staff, when looking at the Lake Tuggerah levels, which is 1.3 metres AHD, this will give information ahead of that, which will signal perhaps earlier if that 1.3 is going to be breached in Lake Tuggerah. So I think a great example, as I said, of the community actually coming up with a suggestion which the staff have been happy to incorporate into the principles of managing the entrance. So with that, I'm very happy to approve the recommendations that are shown on the screen. And we move to item 2.22, which is the tender for the Shelley Beach Road Empire Bay. Now, as Mr. Bolgoff mentioned earlier, unfortunately we got no tenders for that project. It is a project that was intended to be funded by the Commonwealth. And in fact, it was a project that somewhat unfortunately, I think, however, getting no tenders certainly helps in one sense, is that the Commonwealth, when they came into power, they needed to reduce some costs. And this was one of the projects, that particular Shelley Road was one of the projects that they planned to defer. So it's not cancelled, it's been planned to be deferred. As I said, we couldn't get a tender for it. So it's coincidentally worked out quite well all the way around for both parties. But nonetheless, at some point in time, I do expect the Commonwealth will be able to fund that. And hopefully when life gets a little easier around the contracting area, we may well be able to find contractors who are prepared to do the job. So with that, as I said, we will now just note that there were no tenders, and we will cancel that proposal for the contract so that we will wait until there is funding available to go back before we go back out to tender. So with that, happy to approve those recommendations as shown on the screen. And we move to the last item, which is the Office of the Internal Ombudsman, proposed changes to the delivery of services. I'm very familiar with these things, having been involved in putting the very first Ombudsman into a council in New South Wales. So very familiar with the roles they play. The rules are changing, or are likely to change. We're likely to see coming into play from the misconduct review that was carried out by a chap by the name of Keller. And the recommendations are there that managing councillor misconduct, maladministration, fraud, corruption, all those areas are best managed by someone outside of council. Obviously, ICAC is one agency that does it at a high level, but we're talking about a councillor behaviour. So the proposal that was covered off in a paper that we provided a submission to the state government on, a proposal to re-look at how code of conduct might be managed, and that under that framework, they were suggesting a code of conduct review panel, which is managed by the state. They were proposing a commissioner who would be the head of that, and that it is that party that would then manage all of the complaints. So what we therefore need back inside the organisation is someone to facilitate and manage that process, not do the investigation per se, but actually manage the process of getting it out to the requisite outside agencies or people to get them to do the full investigation and so on. So it frees a chief executive, for example, which is always, and I've been in that same position as Mr. Farmer's no doubt found himself in, when you're in the position of actually having to investigate a code of conduct complaint against one of your councillors and your employment is determined by those councillors, it's a difficult position to be in. So removing that conflict, I think, is an extremely good move. So the proposal from the staff here to actually take the opportunity when the contract expires for the current internal ombudsman and we replace them with a coordinator who will work to put that outside to the right bodies, I think is the right way to go. and they have full powers, proposed, I think, to be able to talk directly to ARIC, to New South Wales Ombudsman, or to any of the outside powers, outside agencies without reference to the CEO or any of the other staff here. So I think it's a much better model, given the way things have gone, and I'm more than happy to approve that for a staff change there. So with that, I'm going to approve that, item 2.3, and we've come to the end of a very long council meeting, and I have to say the behaviour was fantastic tonight, and we got through without any disruption at all, and I'm grateful for that. It's been a long night, and I'm about to have a coffee fit probably, so hopefully everybody has a good night. Unfortunately, we're not providing tea and coffee out there tonight, but I'm happy to come out the back and have a yarn. I know. Well, maybe I can open up that door, can I, and get tea and coffee? You'll have to do your own, but we'll see how we go. I'll come up there anyway. All righty, well, with that, I shall close the meeting down at 8:16. That's almost a record for length, isn't it? Unfortunately.